Hi, folks. Welcome to iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast. Today is Wednesday, and that means we've got to watch PMQs and FMQs. I managed to get an excuse to avoid PMQs and regret it because apparently Stuart and Jimmy had quite good fun with it. We're also going to have a wee word about how certain government ministers treat questions when they're at the dispatch box, but we'll leave that till later on. PMQs, boys, fill me in. Jimmy.
Well, it started off in its usual sycophantic manner, with some Tory or other desperately trying to attach themselves to Boris's bottom, but it got quite entertaining actually. Keir Starmer, he kind of skewered Boris a wee bit. Boris ended up back to the usual bluster last week, screaming about, are you going to ask for people to go to school? Are you going to ask people to go back? Because he absolutely nailed them on two lies, basically, that Boris came out with to Parliament last week in PMQs, where he was talking about poverty. Two of those answers had been reviewed by whoever, the parliamentary fact checker. One of them was mostly false, and the other one was just labelled false. At which point Boris looked absolutely horrified that he'd been caught out, and as I say, went straight into bluster mode. I personally think Boris's coaching on trying to have a pop at Keir Starmer, basically calling him my learned friend and what have you, it backfires spectacularly because Starmer just goes with facts. He has his questions laid out. He has his factual backing for that question absolutely bang on. He nails his brief, basically. He knows what he's doing. And Boris clearly doesn't, and the bluster just shows it. It shows him he's not up to the job, mate. And I think bringing back a full parliament will be quite entertaining because he's not going to get the backing of all his friends behind him because he's just not capable.
Stuart?
Yes, I've got into the habit of watching PMQs with Boris Johnson and counting the adjectives. Today, it took a wee while before fantastic came along, but it was obviously coming. The moment he'd uses words like that, fantastic, or this is world-beating, is there anywhere in the world that's any better? As soon as he picks one of these ridiculous words, you know he's lost. He's lost the game.
Mm-hmm. He came out with a belter the day, Stuart. He was talking about possible wee flare-ups of the virus, and he talked about having a cluster-busting system ready to go. You're like, yeah, really? Yes. Somebody's written that for you because it's got a couple of U's in it.
That was fantastic. The cluster buster operation.
That's the one.
It was backed up by biosecurity. And when he was asked about the app that totally failed, he challenged, of course, he had the only thing that you can do is challenge Keir Starmer and ask him a question. And he challenged him to say, oh, but there's no better app in the world. And as soon as Keir Starmer stood up, what about the one in Germany? 12 million downloads already.
Aye.
Ba-boom.
And that's one based on open source code developed by Cambridge University that our government was offered in March. So if it works in Germany and it works in Switzerland and it was developed in England, why on earth have we not given it a try?
I do think that Keir Starmer's advisors have thought about this and told him. I mean, I think it's his training in nature anyway to be quite forensic, but that's the way to nail Boris. And having forced him into asking opposition questions at prime minister's questions, that's him. He's had it now. He's avoiding answering questions, but at some point the speaker is going to have to say to him, your job is to answer questions here, Mr. Johnson. It is not to ask questions. And if the speaker doesn't do it, the speaker is failing.
Yeah. It just shows that inherent weakness, Norrie. And as I say, he's not up to the job. We've already heard a few shall we say, murmurings from, not necessarily from the back benches, but when you're hearing it from lobby correspondents that the back benches aren't happy this early into a premiership where he's just, I mean, he's only won an election. I know it's December, it's 6 months ago now, it doesn't seem like that, but given everything that's happened, he's just recently been elected with an 80 majority, which is huge in historical terms for the Tories. And already there's some serious murmurings. I think Boris could be in real bother, particularly if things don't go well with this opening up a lockdown.
I think they'll wait until all the mud that will inevitably be thrown about sticks to him, and then they'll get rid of him. I think they'll let him carry the can for all the mistakes.
Well, I think it's messier than you predict, Norrie. I think both of you are assuming that it's just, say, the 1922 committee or the men in grey suits, or I think it's a lot messier than that. So it's a bit more unpredictable, the future of Boris Johnson.
Well, I think you'll not see the back of him till next year. That's for sure.
I'm not going anywhere, but I would bet money on. Yeah, I'd put a couple of quid on. He's gone well before Christmas.
Nah, I don't think so.
I think
they're going to let him take all the flack, get Brexit done. So if that goes badly wrong, they can blame him for that in his present cabinet, and then they'll have a clear out.
Well, it's well, I mean, there's you know, it's a good argument, Norrie. I mean, it's a little hard to argue against that, but on the other hand, he's such a loser. And how long? Well, yes, obviously they've got 4 years to stay in power, so you could be right.
Time's on their side.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's the perfect fall guy. Because the impression I get is there's nobody really likes Boris, except the Tory heartlands. And I think they'll be reassessing their judgment at the moment.
What do you think about here's an idea. We've got coming up, obviously, we're getting, as soon as the summer's over, we're into a presidential election in America. And Trump's performance there could define Johnson's future.
Yeah, it could. I think, well, Johnson's going to clearly come out and back Donald because he had that backing from Donald in the first place. I think the American election could get so nasty over summer that he actually tries to steer as clear of it as possible, because some of the statements already coming out at Trump are frightening, given how far behind he is in the polls. If he stays this far behind in the polls till August, September, he'll be saying anything. I mean, he's already talking about not accepting the result of the election. He's already talked about electoral fraud. He's talked about fraud in terms of postal ballots. And we're still in June. He's got till November to go.
I think what we really need to watch carefully is the shenanigans with the voting. I mean, is it in Kentucky, the biggest town in Kentucky has one voting station?
Does it?
I mean,
oh, yeah.
The Americans disenfranchise, especially where the Republicans are in charge, at will. And I think there could be a lot of problems, because I think Donald Trump will turn a blind eye if it's to his advantage.
Oh, of course he will, mate. Do you think it'll be worse than the hanging Chad thing for all them years ago?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
The only thing I've been annoying with that was that it used to hang on week after week before you got a result.
FMQs.
Yes, I'm glad you moved on without mentioning Ian Blackford.
Okay, I didn't watch it, so I don't have an opinion on Ian Blackford. Was he?
No, just forget about him, because he's better.
No, I'll just point up and say I think that was tactical today for him to ask about the request for borrowing powers, and for Boris to give the usual bluster about the Barnett consequentials and what have you. That was the one I couldn't get consequentials out my mouth there. No. I think that was deliberate, because I think there'll be more and more to come. There'll be a much bigger push from Scottish politicians about our lack of borrowing powers and our having to wait for England to okay anything that we want to do with our economy.
Yeah,
could be right. No, I had an idea even before FMQ started that, wait a minute, this is only 12:20 and we're not ready to record till 1:30. And I was a little dubious about would we stick the course? Would I be getting in touch with you, Norrie, and suggesting we start early? But as it went on, the wee gems kept appearing. Right at the start, the First Minister announced the biggest relaxation of the lockdown to date. There was so much of it, I was writing like mad. And in the end, you're waiting for the printout because there was so much in it. But she made one or two very important words. She came up with the word again, slower than England. We're much more likely to succeed. Elimination is the plan. And the other expression was targeted suppression. She has obviously got some really good communication people behind her. She doesn't use her words without planning them.
What I found interesting, I don't know if you remember yesterday when I laid out my theory, only to be proved right by John Swinney's announcement on opening schools. I do think, and as I said yesterday, and I've said before that the Scottish Government plan is to totally suppress the virus and open everything up and be able to keep it open. And because we seem to have moved to a position of being slightly ahead of England, where we started slightly behind in terms of having an advantage of when we locked down because the virus wasn't as rampant up here.
It wasn't as prevalent up here, aye.
So we had that advantage. And I think now she's extending that advantage by slowing the lockdown more than England. And it also gives her the opportunity to see what's happening in England, which is what we'll hear about. The first major outbreak in England, now that lockdown has been reduced so much, will be her excuse to keep things going slow. It's great politics, and smart science, because you're letting England run the experiment.
I wrote down last night, just after I'd seen what John Swinney had to say, what London and Edinburgh consider manageable levels of infection within the community are markedly different. We've seen that from the start, and it's definitely the case now. I mean, England's basically come out of lockdown with a higher death rate than when they were going in. More people died when the day that Boris made those announcements than did when we went into lockdown. They're considering that acceptable. They consider it's roughly around 1,000 new cases a day. They're considering an acceptable level. We've been under 20 new cases a day for about a fortnight, and we're still trying to drive that down.
We were quite high today, weren't we? We were 14 today.
Aye.
Which is quite high. But what's her name? Devi Shrida,
that's the one.
Shrida, she reckoned between 20 and 30 was acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Just as an aside, but because we can come back to this, my son flagged up what's happening in Victoria in Australia, a state with 5 million people the size of Scotland. They've got 20 cases of the virus, and they're having local lockdowns.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's where we'll be, Stuart. I think it's a certainty that should there be any flare-ups now, we've now had test and trace, a real test and trace system operating for what, 3.5 weeks, and they seem pretty confident that it's getting to most contacts that it needs to get to. So if there are small clusters, I think we might actually be able to bust them clusters, to steal Boris's jargon, because we're a smaller country that seems to be managing things considerably better. Remembering, of course, that our test and trace has no input whatsoever for companies like Serco and is led by the NHS.
Yeah.
People that you might be able to trust to know what they're doing.
Jackson Carlo opened today on the 2 row. Well, obviously, the First Minister was ready to destroy that. And she talked about the virus has got to be closer to elimination before we do much else. Then Jackson Carlo, he really made a mess of himself because his second question, he went straight into the constituency type of question. Oh, my constituent, but he didn't mention the word. The Crieff Hydro, he brought in a particular case. And it's not like somebody that's dying or anything, it was a business. So he made a fool of himself there. And then again, the First Minister came up with another phrase that she'd been obviously coached to use. She determined to get to the point where we have a sustainable recovery. God, she's been
she's been using that for quite a long time.
No, yeah, but I mean, she's laced them all. I'm not going to make hasty decisions. If she's not coached, she's a bloody genius.
Well, I think the best answer we got out of her when she turned around and said to Jackson Carlo, "Oh, by the way, do you remember that paper you produced 3 weeks ago?
Oh yeah, that was good.
To do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. You're the one that's U-turned and changed your position."
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real bugbear with me, and I'm particularly annoyed with journalists who write this crap about U-turns.
Oh dear.
If things change, you change your plans. Now, it's fortunate that things changed for the better to allow them to say, in all probability, we will be opening schools as normal. Said it all along. We go by the science. If the science dictates it, we will change our view. That's my concern. So what the press want are a bunch of politicians who take no account of what's happening in the real world. They simply drive forward with whatever policy they've stated earlier. It's the most ridiculous, thoughtless, stupid, short-sighted bullshit, and it's really beginning to annoy me.
Okay, well, let's move on to the star of FMQs, because out of media,
Jimmy, you're not getting to say anything.
No, he'll have a comment. He'll have loads to say about this. I know he will, because so will you. The star of First Minister questions, without any question of a doubt, was Richard Leonard climbed out of his mediocrity and actually totally starred today's FMQs. He almost had the First Minister on the ropes, but he was very gentle about it. But he really did rather well. And the First Minister took him as she didn't really savage him at all. I mean, what did you think, Jimmy?
I wondered what you were watching, mate. I thought he was poor again. I thought he'll never take a telling. I don't know how many times she's had to tell him that there was not a policy that people in care homes wouldn't be treated in hospital. There was guidance, clinical guidance, written by clinicians, and the decisions were taken by clinicians. And he again tried to infer that there was somehow a government policy that if you were in a care home and caught COVID, you were never getting to go to hospital. And that is not the case. He's been told about 3 or 4 times on that, and he just keeps going on it because he's got nowhere else to go.
Okay.
His problem is either willfully or through ignorance. And I wonder where his parents are, because these were the kind of decisions I had to make for my mum and dad. Should she go to hospital, especially with my mum who had OCP, should she go to hospital, go on oxygen, go through all that trauma? I mean, it knocked her stupid for months if she had to leave the care home. And eventually we managed to get oxygen into a room in the care home. But the effect on people being moved to hospital, you know, intensive care, poked, prodded, blood taken, and then up to a ward and possibly changing within the ward from bed to bed, and then back to the home. I don't think he has any idea of the trauma involved in that.
Well,
I don't think a lot of the politicians do, guys. I think it's the case that they think it's quite a simple thing to take somebody from a care home into a hospital, take them back to a care home, and it's just not. Let's be clear, people are in care homes because they have complex medical needs. Nori, as you say, moving them from room to room is traumatic. Never mind taking them from a care home to a hospital, then back. And I genuinely think a lot of politicians and a lot of journalists and a lot of us don't know enough about that. But it's given very little consideration.
Okay, can I just I'll sum up my position on Richard Leonard in this way. He had a good performance. He did well with his performance. He got away with it. I think it's important to point out what one or two things the First Minister said about in response to him. I thought it was quite important. She said she doesn't like talking about a second wave. She prefers to use the term that a resurgence is likely. Again, she's been the expert, especially today. Her performance was easily the best she's had so far in these sort of Holyrood chamber ones on these 20 past 12. She tells us everything that's happening, and then you get what is not a regular FMQs.
I think you're wrong. I think as soon as any opposition leader has to name a constituent, they're on the back foot. As soon as you have to use that, I don't switch off, but I go, this question is not based in policy.
Yeah, you're right. Well, exactly, because when you're playing to people's emotions, you know that your case might be a bit ropey. You've not got some strength behind it. That's why you go down the emotional route. I just think Labour are flagging me. He didn't want to go on education today because he would get a slap down about why Scottish trade unions have worked on the blended learning and going back full time. Quite openly, the unions have worked on both of those scenarios and now want to whinge about going back full time because clearly they've not got their way on certain parts of it. And Labour would have to take the union side on that one because they're absolutely in the pocket of the unions now that they're, particularly in Scotland, they have to be in the pocket of the unions because it's the only place to get any money.
That's a good point.
Well, the real question for going back to school is not the pandemic. It's the confidence of A, the teachers, and B, the parents.
Aye.
If their two groups are confident about going back, it'll work.
And that's the difference between Scotland and England's take on it, Norrie. The Scottish take has always been, when it is safe to go back, we will go back. Whereas the English take, particularly try to drive kids back at the start of this month, was all about get your kids back to school so that you can go back to work. It was all about the economy. It was nothing to do with safety.
Also threats, because they're much. I'm not saying you can't be sanctioned in Scotland if you don't send your kids to school, but it's a bit like other sanctions. They're not nearly so serious.
Aye, they're not needles. They're no needles so used as prevalent, Stuart. Can I mean the sanctioning up here is far rarer than it is down south.
Can either of you remember anybody being sent to jail in Scotland for not sending their kids to school? I can't.
No, I can't.
Don't think it happens in Scotland.
I can't even remember a fine. I think maybe once. I do think though that one of the things that will come into play is parents who are possibly shielding or kids who should be shielding. They will have a plan basically to let them stay home.
Exactly.
And that'll come up. I'll tell you the other thing, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised either if Labour managed to switch a couple of the unions into complaining about PPE or lack of cleaning or whatever. This story is not finished.
It won't be Unison because they're now pro in a referendum.
Aye, it'll be the EIS, mate. It's always that baldy guy that looks like the baddie to 2000 AD or something that does all the whinging.
Larry Flanagan.
That's a chap, aye.
I was throwing cushions at the television last night with him.
Did you? Those were only cushions.
He's been sitting down with the government for God knows how many months now, discussing this. And he made out, basically when he was interviewed, that it wouldn't happen unless he was totally satisfied about the safety of his. Well, you're sitting in meetings all the time. What do you want? I hear it from you in black and white, so you can't backtrack a month down the line.
Well, can we move on to? I thought Alison Johnson really brought up an important topic because I think it's one that all three of us might be interested in, as well as a universal basic income, which is Norrie's favourite hobby horse. Alison Johnson came up with the job guarantee scheme, which is the principal plan that if you're into modern monetary theory, to come out of to rescue an economy, that you should have a job guarantee scheme. And Alison Johnson asked the First Minister about that, and she didn't get a blank on that, really.
Because it's SNP policy. There's a job guarantee scheme was supposed to be implemented.
They can't do that without the fiscal powers from Westminster, so they can't do it.
Right, Stuart. Well, I tell you what it is. It's youth employment it's applicable to. It is not a general job guarantee. She was talking about youth employment.
Well, that's fair enough.
And the scheme that the SNP have been unable to implement because of coronavirus is a youth job guarantee scheme.
It's also the case that it was one of the main recommendations of Benny Higgins' review that came out on Monday. And I thought Alison Johnson, while tipping her hat to Benny Higgins, she was kind of looking for the SNP to jump up and do this in the next month or so, which is practically impossible given everything else they've got on their plate at the moment.
It's actually going to be very difficult, I think, to expand it to the size it needs without borrowing powers. Which brings us back to Stuart's point.
Yeah, right. But you're right. So, Nora, you're saying that, okay, Alison Johnson was just asking with reference to the 50,000 young people leaving school looking for work, that the job guarantee scheme was only to do with that. So what's the position with Benny Higgins' commission?
Benny Higgins agrees with the youth scheme.
Okay.
In fact, recommends, I think, an expansion of it.
Aye.
But he is against UBI.
I'm not talking about UBI. I'm talking about the job guarantee scheme.
Well, the job guarantee scheme, on the scale you were talking about, is often looked at as an acceptable form of UBI. Effectively, you're paying people a wage who don't have a job.
That's a big difference. Guarantee. But I don't want to argue about it here.
No, I agree. They're two different things, but it's often viewed as an acceptable thing to do.
Let me finish with my point, which is it's not often you hear that term brought up by politicians yet.
What, the job guarantee scheme?
A job guarantee scheme.
Well, it's been spoken about for sections of the community in the past. I mean, it's not, it's almost like subsidized jobs.
Aye, Alison Johnson was going on about green jobs and green apprenticeships and such. In a similar manner about green power, how they done it in Germany in 2010 to 2012. They had quite a big sort of scheme bringing people into renewables. We've tried that a couple of times in the past. Again, you kind of need borrowing powers. You kind of need to be able to turn around and say, by the way, not only, well, actually, you kind of need some of what Benny Higgins has suggested, not just buying wee shares of companies like BiFab, but doing the whole state aid thing. Our offshore wind energy, for example, so many of these pylons are built in South Korea, Spain, places like that. We could genuinely create about 40,000 jobs, but we'd have to be out of the European Union, not be subject to state aid rules for a couple of years, perhaps join EFTA and get some kind of dispensation to ignore state aid rules for another couple of years.
Well, your problem with EFTA is
100,000 jobs, mate.
EFTA have to follow state aid rules to a large extent.
Well, look, it's not worth, to be honest, the work that BiFab could do, it's low-skilled work. It's just welding steel. We actually want the high-tech work, to be honest.
But there's engineering works that can do the high-tech work. That's one of the problems, is getting all meshed together. You go to these big Spanish companies and they've got it all under one roof. That is a stumbling block.
Look, here, I've got a question for you guys. I don't know about you, but I actually caught a program, I think it was on BBC Scotland last night, about Silicon Glen. Did either of you guys catch it?
No, never seen it.
It's about IBM coming to Greenock and building their factory and everything that followed after that. And all the different companies, like the computer companies that came to Scotland. You know, the computer that steered the Apollo that went to the moon, that wasn't necessarily built in Greenock, but all that, the same thing. And it was fascinating to watch. So what happened to that, the way? Because at one point, Scotland was a leader in computing science.
What happened to it was IBM, and IBM fell behind everybody else. That's what happened.
I've still got a laptop around somewhere that says IBM on it, but I must admit it was made in China.
Well, IBM have been cutting edge for a long time.
In the last couple of downturns, all the American companies took manufacturing home. And
I mean, manufacturing is not rocket science either, is it?
Sometimes it is if you're manufacturing rockets, Stuart, but no, but American companies have taken most of their R&D home, and their manufacturing has been outsourced to China because it's that bloody cheap.
Yeah. My second job was working in an American engineering company. In fact, I learned a hell of a lot about life working for them.
My old man worked for the Yanks for years, for most of his time in the Middle East. And he had nothing but respect for the way that they internally moved employees up. It was always done on ability, never done. It's used to get guys would appear with degrees from this Ivy League and that Ivy League. And they would get the same 6 months as the wee guy for Shackleston, who'd been with the company 5 years. The wee guy for Shackleston could do the job. He got the job. And the Ivy League guy got an air ticket home.
Well, the only thing, the first thing I always remember about working for this American company was they counted the bloody washers. Every washer had a value. And I was not appalled, I was shocked.
That's how you make money, son.
Yeah, well, I came from the Bank of Scotland, which that's another story for another.
Oh, that incompetent shower of Robin.
Yeah, something like that.
I was going to say they didn't count their fucking money, never mind washers. But it does bring into play that old Scottish word pockle, because when companies are counting their washers, there ain't no pockle.
That's true. Jimmy, you messaged me yesterday and asked me to capture a clip of the redoubtable Priti Patel.
Aye. The glorious Miss Patel and all her torn-faced greeting. Oh, I didn't even want to go there. I really shouldn't. But basically, Joanna Cherry took Priti Patel to school yesterday afternoon in the Commons. It was actually most of it whilst we were bloody recording yesterday. I just caught the end of it. But about Windrush and how poorly this government is reacting to a report. Was it Wendy Williams that done the report on Windrush?
Aye, it was.
And really, Priti Patel she's basically just trying to, I wouldn't say cover up, because it is a cover up, but she's trying to do it nicely. She's trying to do it politely, and she's actually trying to do it publicly. But this government isn't capable of actually addressing the problems that created the Windrush scandal, because they are still absolutely up to their neck in the same horrendous casual racism that brought everything about in the first place.
What struck me about Patel's answer to Joanna Cherry, I've got a clip we'll have a look at in a minute, but her answer to Joanna Cherry, she tried to blame everybody else. She went back to the 70s and 80s to blame the Labour government. She tried to blame the coalition government, which was essentially a Tory majority government, and took no responsibility for not dealing with it at all. And she simply ignored the question.
Oh, what a surprise there.
Oh, no, this was like a long-winded answer that did everything but answer the question. I'll show you I'll show you this clip of her answering our own Deirdre Brock that will give you, and look at her face when she looks at the speaker during this one, because this will show you exactly what her attitude is. Basically,
in which we should be approaching this.
Deirdre Brock.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has just admitted that successive UK governments were institutionally racist and that the hostile environment resulted directly in the Windrush scandal. What exact actions will she take to change the culture of government in Whitehall to ensure it never happens again? Will she unpick the odious and repressive hostile environment?
watch the look on her
Mr
face.
Deputy Speaker, I refer the Honourable Lady to my comments earlier.
Totally dismissive.
Aye. Murray, it's no wonder that, is it three, certainly a couple of senior civil servants have complained about working with her because she doesn't want to answer questions. She wants things done her way, and that's the only possible way to do it. It'll be interesting to see when this employment tribunal, there we go, when the most senior civil servant in the Home Office takes it to court. Because
was there not an inquiry supposed to be reporting on her behaviour?
that kind of whitewashed it, mate. That kind of was, as COVID was getting worse, they were able to basically do a nice whitewash job on that and say, no, she's never been an issue to work with. Everybody thinks she's an absolute dream of a person. But that's not going to happen in court because they've already offered this boy £250,000 to go away quietly, and they told them to ram it. So she's going to have to show up and explain herself. And by the way, the thing with Joanna Cherry, you could clearly see how uncomfortable she was at being questioned. And to accuse Joanna Cherry of not having read a report and only selectively quoting from it shows what an amateur she is, because there's no danger that Joanna Cherry only partly read that report. I think we all know what a professional Joanna is.
Yeah, true. Stuart, thoughts on Priti?
I didn't see it, sorry.
Well, she behaved really rather badly. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say.
That's all right, Norrie.
I think we're at the point of, has anybody got any other little tidbits they'd like to bring up?
I think we may have gone on too long. We're nearly hitting the half-hour mark.
Stuart, I think we're all kind of getting a wee bit thrown by that virus dancing a bit behind Norrie and reaching out to his napper.
I just thought it was time everybody was reminded the pandemic hasn't gone away, lads. It's still here.
It makes for a brilliant wallpaper behind you, pal.
Okay, guys, we'll call it a day at that. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for being with us. Jimmy Hutton, Stuart Lockhead, I'm Norris.
Bye-bye.
And we'll see you all tomorrow, no doubt.